Hey, everybody, and welcome to Camera Dads, episode number 7. I am one of your two hosts, Mr. Phil Ringsmith, and on the other side of the internet with me is my co-host and brother, Simon. How are you doing tonight, Simon?
Hey, Phil, doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I am great. I'm really excited to be back in the studio office area recording another show with you.
Excellent. Well, today's show hopefully will be interesting to a lot of parents / dads out there who are into photography, just like all of our shows are interesting, right?
Absolutely.
So today, Phil and I are going to talk about the title of a show is called The Early Days, and we've got a lot of notes, but we're going to kind of see where this takes us. And the big picture here is what as we first got into more serious digital photography, what made us get that way, and when do we realize that we wanted to get more serious with digital photography? How did that involve our kids, and what have we learned since then? So a lot of parents have gone through the same phases you and I have gone through, and we wanted to share our experiences because many parents get stuck kind of at the first phase and don't really know what to do. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's our topic for the evening.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. So let's go back to the beginning, I guess, when when we first respectively had kids. My oldest is 7.5, and your oldest, I think, is 5.
He just turned 6.
Just turned 6.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. When my son was born, I didn't have a DSLR. I had one of my zoom as far as you possibly can, Kodak Z612 or something like that.
It was a Kodak? I thought it was a Nikon.
I had a Nikon at one point, but I went back and looked, and I found some pictures that I had with a Kodak, which was even before that, I think. So
sweet.
Yeah, I think after that I still bought a Nikon. Yeah, it was a Nikon Coolpix, and that was one of those, again, a zoom as far as you can cameras.
Because the farther it zooms, the better it must be, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I've stuck to that over the years, but no. When I first started taking pictures of my newborn, I didn't really have any particular thing in mind when I was taking pictures. I went back and I looked at some of those, and they're just, and this isn't a bad thing, I'm just making an observation, they're just all over the place. Pictures of him at the hospital, pictures of him in the bassinet sleeping, or in the car seat being carried around, or pictures of everybody who's holding him for the first time, getting those pictures. And a lot of the pictures are just fine.
Yeah, and I've got the same kind of
that story again, but they're not the kind of pictures that I would really want to. I was thinking about how I wanted to go about this, and the pictures of my kids that are really important to me now are the ones that I can print out and put on the wall or put on my desk at work.
And you have a lot of pictures printed out for the listeners who've never been to Phil's house. I don't know if your current house has it, but your former house had this wall that was covered in pictures that you printed out. And
yeah, we had a photo wall essentially of probably about 50-ish photos covering the whole time span, even some when my wife and I were kids, sort of like a family tree. But most of those, were pictures of our kids and our pets and our family that we took ourselves and just printed at Walgreens, and had tons of those on the wall.
And I know what you mean. I went back and looked through the photos that I took when my oldest son was first born, and that's what I had too. I had these photos that kind of document the everyday stuff, but they're not great photos. And certainly I can recall memories from those times by looking at these photos, but they're nothing I would really want to print and frame or anything like that. I mean, there's a time and a place, but my style was much more take snapshots of whatever I see, or I tried to be artistic and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand the limitations of my camera. And earlier I mentioned phase one. I think, and I don't have data to prove this, but I think just in talking to people, a lot of people get stuck at phase one, which is there's this problem where you want to get pictures, but you want to get better pictures, but you're not quite sure what to do. And sometimes that's like a paralyzing feeling where what do you do? How do you solve this issue of getting better pictures of your kids? And I dealt with that. And I think you kind of went through that same thing. And that's that step one is what we eventually we figured out our own way around that. And hopefully we'll explore that a little bit. And maybe someone else who's dealing with that right now with a newborn might find that interesting.
Yeah, my first steps of doing anything better was simply buying a better camera. Not a DSLR yet, but just honestly, I think it was that the warranty, the Best Buy 3 or 4 year warranty that I had on the previous camera was about to run out.
I think I remember this.
The camera was still working just fine.
Yeah. And you threw it under your car and ran it over.
I accidentally, one day I was just so clumsy and I dropped it several times. And
are you serious?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I did a little bit of research and found out what they do in the case of your warranty bringing a camera in for repairs or whatnot. And I took advantage of that. And so I took this busted camera in and I ended up getting a couple $100 credit towards a new camera. And that was the only reason I did that was because I knew I had the warranty on the other one and I was going to get a new camera for very little money. So I went ahead and did it. I didn't have the interest in getting better photos, getting a DSLR or anything like that. I just took advantage of an opportunity to get a better camera. And part of me, of course, was thinking, well, better camera, I'll have better pictures too. Mm-hmm. And the way that I was thinking at the time, it was, of course, a huge zoom camera, like a 28x or 24x optical.
Yeah, it was huge. Camera. Whatever it was, I was astonished when I saw that thing.
I just thought, oh, this is great. I can get pictures of the kids doing anything, and they're going to turn out spectacular because I can see them from all the way across the yard or all the way across the room.
And it was like a DSLR style camera, wasn't it? It was like a kind of a big chunky camera with a grip on the side. I mean, at first glance, you would look at it and think that's a regular interchangeable lens camera.
Yeah, it looked like that. Yep.
Did it work? Of course, did your photos instantly get better?
Maybe the quality, like the noise and the graininess of the photos improved simply because the optics and the sensor in the camera was better than the one that I had before. But other than that, nothing about the way I took photos improved. In fact, depending on that zoom lens to think I was getting better photos probably hindered me more than anything.
Man, there's a
lot
of wisdom right there, Phil.
Well, thank you. That's what I'm here for. There's something that I wanted to ask you about, though, about these, how do you get what kind of pictures are good when you have an infant? You're taking too many, you're trying to get just the ones you want. What do you think about, and I'm assuming this happens where you are in the hospital, some photographer who's registered with the hospital will come through and drop flyers off in your room and come back around the next day with like a basket and a pillow and some props and take these, professional-ish photos of your baby so that you can have that to keep.
Did you guys do that with one of your kids? Someone I know had that happen.
I think we did. Well, it happened with all three of ours.
Okay.
And I think we did do that with one of them because I remember this sort of a wicker basket with a pillow in it.
Yeah.
And of course, this person makes a living taking these infant photos, professionally. And so they know how to crinkle the blanket just right, and to position the baby and put her hands up here to fold it.
Sure,
And,
sure. And
do
they
all
know how
that
to
stuff.
control the lighting and.
Oh yeah, yeah. When
So you're asking what I think
first
about
happened, I was
that?
like, I didn't know how to feel about that. Like,
Yeah.
well, shoot, these are super expensive, but I don't know what I'm doing. Should I get these photos taken, and should I keep them? What? I don't think. I really don't think we did it with all three of our kids. I know we did it with at least one of them. But I mean, did that happen with you, or what do you think about that?
Now that you mention it, we never had that, and maybe it's because we live in a smaller town. There's about 45,000 people where we live, so maybe there's not as big of a market for it. But that was never even an option. And the only photos we have when our kids were first born are just these super grainy snapshots that we happen to take with our pocket camera. So I think it's a good idea, and certainly it wouldn't hurt. Although it's frustrating that once you walk out that hospital, you're no better off with your own pictures. And I almost wonder if it would be worth going around to parents with newborns and doing like a little 20-minute photo education to show people, make sure you put the, open up your windows so that you get light when you're trying to take a photo of your kid, and don't zoom in on your kid, but move yourself in. Just little tricks like that.
Flash, because you're gonna get red eye and everything's just
yeah. And I don't know the answer. I mean,
that's an interesting idea.
Because like you said just now, when you got your camera, you thought your photos would get better, and your camera was improved, but your skills weren't necessarily upgraded just because you bought a new camera. And
Absolutely
I think
not. Yeah.
And that's common. That's exactly what happens it happened to me. It happens to a lot of parents where there's this problem that you can identify the problem, which is my photos aren't as good as I want, but you don't necessarily know how to solve it. And oftentimes people think that buying a better camera will solve that problem. But I think I'm going to make an assumption here, based on limited data. I think that what often happens is the camera doesn't fix the problems, because you still end up with the pop-up flash coming up, and you haven't learned about composition, you haven't learned about lighting, you haven't even learned what elements make a pleasing photo. And I know several parents who have the fancy camera, but go back to their iPhone because the fancy camera doesn't really get them any better results as far as they can tell compared to their iPhone. So they just use the iPhone. And
that's a good point, I think. And I think I can think of some people that are in that same boat that have the fancy camera, not necessarily DSLR, but a good like a mid-range Sony or something, with a pop-up flash, and but essentially the photos that you're going to get aren't much different than what you'd get on a new high-end phone.
Yeah.
And they may have one of those also. Upgrading the camera doesn't upgrade the photographer.
No, it really doesn't. And
there's my wisdom drop for you right now.
Certainly it can upgrade the tools at your disposal, but that there is exactly what happened to me. When my oldest son was born, he was born in the summer of 2011. And I think I've mentioned it before on this show. We had a Panasonic ZS7, which is a pretty good pocket camera, but the photos of my kid weren't what I wanted. They were grainy, they were blurry, and they always had the flash. The flash was always popping up, or the going off. And I knew that I could turn the flash off, but then they were blurry, and it was so frustrating. And I specifically remember our dad visiting one time, and I'm holding my eldest son, and my dad, or our dad, had a Canon Digital Rebel, it was like one of the first digital cameras that Canon made. And he took this picture of me holding my son, and it was awesome. It
And
like,
there was no flash, was there?
no, there was no flash. It looked so good. And he was just like a month old. And I told my wife, I said, how do we get that photo? I couldn't figure it out. And I was so frustrated because I wanted that photo, and like it was crisp. You could see every hair on his head. It was frustrating. And here I was thinking, I have a good pocket camera. What am I doing wrong? I never got those blurry backgrounds. I didn't know how to make the camera focus on my kid. I mean, did you go through this, Phil?
Oh yeah. Yeah. You just keep taking kind of the same photos over and over again, hoping something will get better. Okay, maybe I'll have more lights on this time and that'll help. Or I'll get a little bit closer to them this time. Or, maybe if I zoom just right, then I'll get that blur that I've seen in other photos. And the thing that was just missing for me before I got upgraded to a DSLR was really just the crispness.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
any photo really. You just don't get, well, especially photos with a prime lens on a DSLR, but just that tack sharp, crisp.
And you know it when you see it, man.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you said, when our dad took that picture of your son and you see that and you're just thinking, wow, that's the kind of photos I wish I have been taking this whole time. And I thought that I was getting really good photos. But
so that's phase one.
A whole level there.
I know. And how did you solve that, Phil? As we work our way through this issue here, and I think a lot of parents out there listening to this can probably say that they're in that same boat, or they've been in that same boat. So, what did you do to fix this?
Well, it's not something that can happen overnight. It's something that takes a lot of time. And the thing that I think I learned more than anything wasn't necessarily the camera, because I believe what I stated earlier is a very valid point, that a better camera doesn't make a better photographer and doesn't necessarily improve your photos. I mean, they will look better, but they don't really, the better gear isn't truly going to change the photos that you get. You've got to learn how to take better photos.
Yeah.
Something that I learned over time, and I've mentioned this before on the show, is really your perspective. It's moving yourself and into a position where you can get a picture of your infant or your toddler doing things, and taking the picture from waist height versus on the ground at their level can make a world of difference in the final outcome of that photo, regardless of what kind of camera you have.
Yeah, that's
just learning to pay attention to what else is in the room, what else is around the child,
and where's the light coming from.
Man, where's the light? Are you going to be in shadows? Something that I'm still struggling with is the background. You really got to start paying attention to, I say you really, like, you got to do this, but I'm just sort of speaking from experience. You got to start paying attention to what is in the background, especially because if you don't have that crazy, shallow depth of field with the bokeh blur in the background, you might end up with your toddler standing there, holding the balloon or whatever it is, but in the background, still quite a bit in focus, is a bunch of other people sitting on the couch. Whereas the same shot taken you go around the corner 90 degrees and you approach it from a different direction. Well, now you've got an empty wall or a window or something else behind them, not something that's going to distract.
Well, and what you're saying,
from what you really want in that photo. And what I really want in that photo is the child at that moment. That's what I want you to see when you look at it.
And you don't need a better camera to do that. These things that you're talking about, Phil, the brilliant part of these things like looking at the background and getting on their level, you can do that with an iPhone. And if you're someone, if a parent is listening right now and they're stuck at phase one where their photos aren't as good, those little things go a long way and they sort of transcend gear. Doesn't matter if you have a pocket camera, an iPhone, or a fancy DSLR. Putting your kid uh, in such a way, or putting yourself in such a way so that you have a nice background behind your kid, or just getting on their level, literally getting down on their level. I see a lot of photos of kids that my friends share online that are taken from the parent's perspective. So they're looking down, and it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And for a lot of people, maybe that's what they prefer. But if you simply bend your knees and get down on the level of your kids, especially if it's a baby, then you're gonna kind of immediately see a difference in your photos, and you're gonna see that the kind of the world from their point of view, and it really connects the viewer to the kids because now I'm not an outsider looking down on the world of my kids. I'm at eye level with my kids. And so I'm seeing things, I'm seeing them in the photo, but I'm seeing the world from their perspective. And it makes a huge difference. Just these simple, basic things like that.
Here's one way that I thought of, maybe a good way to explain that the end result of doing these things. And again, you can't just pick this stuff up overnight. I mean, my kid's going to turn 8 this year, and so it takes a long time to figure these things out. But if you've got a bunch of photos where some of them are taken, from the adult's perspective, and then a few are taken down on the ground at their level, and you're flipping through a book of all these photos, or you're going through a slideshow, the ones where you're going to just stop and say, whoa, look at that photo. Those are going to be the ones where you get down on their level and you really consciously think about, what do I want to get out of this shot? Because otherwise, and again, there isn't anything wrong with this, because you're still going to have photos of your children or of the event or whatever's going on, but they're not going to tell that story in the same way as they would. It's like, look, yeah, it was a birthday, here's all the presents, there's the cake, and that's really fun and all that. But if you take a picture of them eating their cake, standing a few feet away where all the other parents are standing, you're going to get the kitchen or the table or whatever behind them, and it's going to be fine. Or you could go right up there, and if your camera can get this close, you could basically set your camera down on the table with the cake taking up half the frame and your kid's face and right behind them, and their hands mashing and picture that, right?
That's so much better. I'm picturing this in my mind.
That's such a great photo of a kid mashing their hand in the frosting. Then the same exact photo taken from a few feet away, 5 feet, 6 feet in the air at an adult eye level, just isn't going to evoke that same awesomeness of what you're going to get later on. And that's my biggest thing about this whole growing up and the early days, and how I've improved taking pictures of my kids. The gear is great, but it really just, that perspective, that being aware of the surroundings makes so much difference. Thinking about what else is in this shot that I could use, use to my advantage. There's one thing that I like to do is baby feet photos.
I've seen some of those on your photo streams.
Okay. I've got one that's coming to mind now where our daughter, who just turned 1, this was maybe 2 months ago, we had taken her to a lake, and she was in the little the car seat, the carrier thing. She was sleeping, sitting there on the beach in the car seat sleeping. And so I got down on the sand, and her feet were kind of sticking out the end, and so I framed her feet with her face and her hands blurry behind it.
Oh, I can picture
And
this.
that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
exactly what I wanted to get, because I don't know, it's just something about that says, look at this cute little baby
Well, and
sleeping, those feet. Oh, that to me, that's just so much more satisfying of a photo.
what you're describing to me, it's this mental process of becoming more intentional and involved with your photography, specifically with your kids, because I can think of the that same photo you just described where your daughter's sleeping, and you might just reach over and snap a picture with your camera, and there's nothing necessarily compelling about it. And someone might look at it and think, "Oh, that's a cute kid," but by involving yourself with what's happening and making these conscious choices to put the feet in the foreground, to frame the photo in such a way so that her face is in the background, slightly blurred out, you're making yourself do these intentional things in order to improve your photography. And that's uh, like you said, with regard to gear and making a better photographer, these decisions don't automatically happen just because you get a better camera. It's this sense of um, developing this mindset of being more involved and also reflecting back on the photos you've taken and looking at what may have worked and what didn't work. And I think you mentioned the birthday party, and that was a great example. For me, as my kids are now 6 and 3, they're way more active than they used to be. And I think a crutch that often that some parents rely on is the zoom on their camera. And if there's a mobile phone, then they do the pinch to zoom, which is essentially cropping the photo. But rather than getting in the action with your kids, some parents stand back and just zoom in with their camera.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, the results aren't going to be as compelling as if you make yourself get into whatever your kids are doing. So if they're playing in the backyard with the hose, get down on their level and be involved with them. It's going to make a much more interesting shot than just standing back on the porch and taking a few snapshots of your kids. But that mindset has to kind of work its way through all aspects of the photographing your kids. And it's difficult and it takes effort, especially as they grow up and you have to chase them around. But man, my photos got so much better when I started doing that. And yeah, the gear helped too, but just it's like we're in one of those internet ads on the side of a website, like just this one simple trick. You won't believe what happens next. But I'm telling you, and I'm not telling you, Phil, because you already know this, but anyone who's listening, it matters so much just doing these little things of paying attention to composition and what's in the background and getting on your kid's level. And all these things go so far towards improving your photos. Eventually, though, go ahead.
All right, thank you. When you were describing all of that there, I'm kind of thinking of how this might sound or how this might come off to a parent who's, at that first level and trying to get better photos, and there may be some apprehension that, well, okay, so if I stand over here and I use my zoom, I'm not going to be in the way. I'm not going to get in the scene. I'm not going to
yeah, it's a valid
interfere
concern.
with what kids are doing. So if I stand over here and I zoom in on them, then they're not going to know that I'm taking the photo. And that's actually a whole another thing right there is doing candid photography versus staged photography when it comes to your kids. My short answer is you get much better photos if you can do it candidly. But you might be thinking, well, how can I get candid, unscripted photos if I don't stand over here and zoom in? Because if I get up close to them, they're going to be like, "Oh, Dad."
They probably will. Yes.
Why are you?
Dad, put the camera down.
Why are you
Dad.
doing that? You need to move so I can throw the water balloon at whoever.
Yeah.
Just, and that takes time to be able to get over that fear. And maybe you don't want to risk getting your phone wet or getting your phone dirty or your camera wet or dirty. Those are valid concerns. I talked a few episodes back about how I ruined all the photos on one of my vacations because I set the camera down on the end of a dock as waves were coming in, thinking I was going to get this great photo of
You
water
did?
coming right up to the camera.
Serious?
And then the rest of my photos for that trip, there was water in the lens,
Wait.
because I
I don't remember that. Was I on that vacation?
I don't know.
That wasn't a family.
You were on that podcast. I know that.
That's crazy. I'd say about 6 years ago, my memory, which was already pretty bad, went way downhill. And something happened about 6 years ago. Oh yeah, my oldest son was born.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll take your word for it. And yeah, note to any parents: don't dunk your camera in the lake.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. But I think those are valid concerns. And you just got to slowly, figure out how it's going to work for you and for your kids and for your situations.
I do got to say though, Phil, when we were talking about the tack sharp photo and all that, there is a gear component to this, and I don't want to discount that.
So no. I was going to actually ask you to talk about gear because you are much more of a gearhead than I am.
Thank you.
This.
I will. I was trying to work my way into like a segue from what we were talking about to the next point on our list. So
I'm just going to lob it straight over to you because I know you're itching to talk about the gear. So,
because a lot of these things will definitely improve photos, but there is a gear component to this because at some point you run into the limitations of your camera. And for me, I know I've mentioned this before, about 9 or 10 months after, can I just say Isaac? Is that okay? Isaac is my oldest son. Can I say that? 9 or 10 months after Isaac was born, I was talking to my buddies at work about this, who are both photographers, and Kevin brought his D200 with a 50mm lens over, and instantly my mind was like blown away that someone I could get these photos where my kid was perfectly tack sharp, the background is blurry and all that. And it was weird because when Kevin came over to my house with his camera, he didn't do anything special, and we didn't set up a big lighting rig. We were just in my living room, and he took a few snapshots of my kid. And then we went outside, and he took a few snapshots, and I could not believe it. I look back on those photos, and it's unbelievable. It's like the end of Dodgeball. I just don't believe it, Cotton. And so the gear component definitely matters, and I don't want to discount that. I ended up getting that same camera, a Nikon D200 and a 50mm lens, and it was like an instant bam. That was a finger snap there for the listeners. It was like instant level up. Instantly, my photos were sharp and the backgrounds were blurry, and I was paying attention to things like composition and lighting, all that with my pocket camera, but it never quite worked how I wanted. But man, when I got that new camera, it so much fell into place regarding getting those tack sharp photos. And I had years of learning left to do, which I'm still learning about composition and background and all that. But there was certainly a big chunk of that was solved by getting different gear and really upgrading my camera. What about you?
Pretty similar. Definitely. Oh man, getting a DSLR did help, and the photos got better. But the thing that made the biggest difference with making that leap, that level up, was the 35mm prime lens that I got on your recommendation. And because it's sort of my aha moment, like yours with, I think you said his name was Kevin, who showed you this camera, and he didn't do anything different than what you were doing. My aha moment was when you gave me that same bit of education regarding prime lenses, because the amount of light you can get in with a prime lens over what you get with a kit lens or what you get with a pocket camera can make a huge difference. And you can have so much more control over what you want to have in focus and what you want to be blurry in the background.
Mhm.
The only really key difference is you have to position yourself where you want to be.
Yeah, that prime lens
Because you
doesn't
can't
zoom in
zoom.
and out.
If you want a lens that can do all of those things and can zoom, you're talking about many hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to be
Yeah.
able to do that. And that's not the kind of gear that you and I are really into. We don't have anything like that. And I wouldn't want anything like that, because that, well, for me, I think if I had, I don't know, a $2,000 lens, I don't know, let's just say that would take some of the fun out of it for me. Because then the lens would be doing everything that I myself am learning how to do.
Well, I do shoot with a $2,000 lens, and it is pretty fun. but I do know what you mean, and I know you and I don't like to sit and make recommendations, or at least I'm generally not comfortable telling people what they should or shouldn't do, because if it works for you, then I say do it. But I was surprised at how much mileage I could get out of gear that was not that expensive. And you can get used cameras online, not necessarily Craigslist or eBay, which you can do. There's sites like keh.com that they deal in used gear, and they even have a return policy. So you can find a camera like a D3100 or a Canon T4i. These cameras that are not current, but when they came out, they were top of the line, and they took amazing photos back then, and they still take amazing photos now. You pair that camera,
they still do.
Yeah,
they took
yeah.
the Tac magazine cover photos you thought you could get.
Incidentally,
old, and you can get them now.
I was reading an article today about the cover of National Geographic in Italy for their version of National Geographic. I mean, it is National Geographic. It's just the Italian version. It's this astronaut in a capsule, and it was shot with a Nikon D3, which is a 10-year-old camera. And the astronaut happened to have an iPhone with him, and there's the astronaut is lit only by the flashlight on the iPhone, which you can't see because he's holding it in his lap. And the photographer took a photo of this astronaut with this camera that's 10 years old. And it's literally the cover photo of National Geographic today. And that just goes to show that you don't need the latest gear. Certainly upgrading your camera will give you access to things like prime lenses and these other things that can dramatically improve your photos. But you don't need the latest gear. You can spend just a $200 on a used camera, $150 on a lens, and your photos will have the ability to be tack sharp. You will also need to pay attention to things you were talking about, Phil, like composition, lighting, putting yourself between the window and your kid, not putting the window right behind your kid, so that your kid is super backlit and comes out really dark. These little tricks that they transcend gear, but there are ways of solving the gear issue without spending a lot of money as well. And if you go down the gear rabbit hole, it can lead to some pretty dark places. And I remember telling my wife when we got that D200 and the 50mm lens, I remember telling her, and I quote, "This is the last camera we'll ever need to buy." And boy, was I wrong. It's only gotten worse over time. But a lot of it comes back to education and learning the exposure triangle, ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, and these really basic things like you've been talking about. So anyway,
no, you're all right. You're all right. I think you've had a nice gear rant there, but I've got something that I thought of when you were talking about the kind of parent who doesn't have a pocket camera or a DSLR. All they've got is their cell phone.
Mhm.
Because cell phones are getting a lot better and they're taking much, much better photos. And some people just depend on that, and that's it. And that's fine. Now that is a case where getting the latest phone every year or two can make a significant difference, or at least it has over the last, let's say 10 years.
Okay.
The iPhone came out 10 years ago, the first iPhone, and it had a camera, but the pictures were terrible. You know, you look at it today and they were just awful.
Yeah.
And because of phones like that became so popular, people started, the manufacturers started putting a lot more effort into better optics, better camera sensors on phones.
Mhm.
And in the last, 5 years, they have gotten significantly better every single year. I remember getting, some of my earlier Android smartphones, like an HTC Evo, which at the
remember that
time
phone.
was like the best phone ever.
Yeah.
And it had a camera that could shoot in 4K, which meant you'd get 4K garbage, but technically it was 4K. And the photos were really, really good at the time.
For the
and
time, yeah.
comparatively, a DSLR would cost you a whole bunch of money, but your cell phone, relatively cheap, you know, $100 or something like that, when you can get them on a contract, and that's going away too. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you use your cell phone as your only camera, upgrading your phone every, let's just say 2 years, if things continue the way that they've been going the last couple of years, those are going to improve dramatically, just every single year.
Yeah, and
I don't think that I don't know when they'll get to the point where DSLRs can take photos, or if there's going to be some, you know, there's physical differences and physical limitations, but.
Well, just to illustrate your point, our friends have a 1-month-old, and my wife went over and saw him the other day, and my friend snapped a few pictures. They have iPhone 7s, and my wife has an iPhone 5, not a 5S, but a 5. And she showed me some of the photos that her friend snapped with her iPhone 7, and she was kind of astounded that they were noticeably better and sharper and had more contrast and all this than her iPhone 5. And if we bring it back to our discussion of gear, at this point, mobile phones have basically decimated the pocket camera industry or niche market.
Pocket cameras are kind of gone.
Yeah, and if that is your primary camera, is your mobile phone, then start looking at composition. I mean, start paying attention to the lighting. Where's the light coming from? Where should I stand so that I can get that shot of my kid, get down on their level, and all these basic things that can dramatically improve your photos.
And use some of the things that your phone can do via software. Also, the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus have this portrait mode, which basically uses software to do that bokeh blurry background for you. And, you know, at a glance, you'd never know that a photo taken with that wasn't taken with a DSLR.
Well,
and HDR is something that can make certain kinds of photos look just pop, just absolutely pop.
Certainly, like landscape and nature photos benefit a lot from that HDR mode.
Photos with different exposures and combine them into one, and they can just look great. And a lot of new phones just have that built in. So learn those tools, those things that your phone has available, because you can use that to improve your photos as well.
Well, we have a listener question from Dennis, and Dennis's question kind of segues into our final section here. Dennis says, I'll just go ahead and read his whole comment. He says, "I think this is a great topic." Dennis says, "I wasn't interested much in photography at the time our children were young, so my wife took most of the snapshots. I now wish that I'd been more involved. We do have some nice memories recorded, but not great photographs." And Dennis, that's exactly Phil's experiences as well. We have these memories, but the pictures are nothing to write home about. And Dennis says, the problem I have now is that I'm trying to get the perfect picture rather than the best one and miss opportunities. What are some ideas on how to stop the perfectionism and get the shot? Phil, you got anything to say to Dennis about this?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind is it's almost like you're taking what we have talked about, learning things like composition and lighting and all of that, and you're just going to the extreme with it, and that's all you're paying attention to. And I don't mean to sound negative. I'm just making an observation and sort of thinking about where you're coming from, and that, because there's so much attention being given to all of these other things, and I've got to get that absolutely perfect shot. So I've got to make sure the lighting is good. I've got to make sure, and now the moment's gone. Oh, the kid woke up and now she's screaming. She was sleeping so peacefully, but
that literally happened to me last week.
So keep all of those things in mind, all of those things that we're learning and that we're talking about. But at the center has got to just be the subject, your child. Like, the reason I'm taking this photo isn't to get a perfect photo, because I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm not going to enter it in a competition. Odds are I'm not going to print some 28 by 40 photo and put it on my wall.
Yeah,
I'm going to have this as my desktop background, or maybe have it in a photo book or in a small frame. So your child has got to be the number one priority in that photo. Once you've kept that in mind, then everything else adds up to the other 50%.
Well,
and use that, but try to make sure that the moment or the story of what you're trying to capture, that stays at the forefront of what you're trying to tell or what you're trying to capture, and then add in those other things like composition and lighting and focus. And I think that you will be able to train yourself over time to pull back a little from focusing on that perfect photo and getting one that really tells what you want it to tell. Simon, what do you think?
So there's this pendulum that I've noticed in my own photography where when my kids were little, I took photos all the time and everything was new and fresh. And I wanted like dozens of photos every day. And then I ended up, it was unsustainable. And then I got into more intentional photography, upgraded my camera, stuff like that. And I was where Dennis was, where I was trying to get the perfect shot. And if I couldn't get the perfect shot, I would delete it from my memory card before I even put it in Lightroom, because it wasn't worth having unless it was tack sharp, perfectly composed and all that. And I've sort of swung back to the middle, where nowadays I'm comfortable with a mix of taking photos with my iPhone and taking snapshots and busting out the big guns and taking some nice pictures that are that do all those things, tack sharp and all that. And for me, it's sort of a mental thing where I'm okay with a variety of things. I'm okay with not having the perfect shot because, like you said, Phil, at the end of the day, it's something for me to look back on with my kids. And for me, I try and keep those basic elements in mind of, am I getting on their level? Am I positioning myself so that there's a garbage dumpster behind them or a tree behind them? And these little things, looking at what else is in the frame. And if I've got those basic elements figured out, which for me by now, I wouldn't say it happens every time, but it happens a lot more than it used to. I sort of do these things subconsciously. So if I've hit those basic elements, then I'm okay with the shot if it's not perfect, because it does capture a moment for my kids and it does tell a story about the birthday party or the playing ball in the backyard or whatever it might be. So that's how I dealt with it. And I mean, it's a process. I'll be dealing with it for as long as I have kids. As we close, I want to mention a couple other things, which was I've also realized that if I'm taking photos all the time, I can't participate in my kids' lives as much. And I used to have my camera on me all the time, taking photos of everything. And I ended up with a Lightroom catalog full of thousands of photos that I don't even know what to do with. And I also then was not participating in what my kids were doing because I was too busy taking pictures of it. And I'd say for the first year or so, when my kids were born, I went for quantity. I got to take photos, thousands and thousands of photos. And I don't do anything with those because they're all the same. Nowadays, I've learned to be okay with taking a few pictures of my kids and then putting the camera down and playing with them.
Yeah, what are you going to do with 80,000 photos?
Nothing.
You know,
of him eating
whatever
peas out of a
your
jar.
kid eating this food for the first time.
Yeah.
You know, they're fun to take, but I think there's almost an addiction to it. You got to have that camera, and okay, this is the first time this is happening. I got to take this photo. Got to take this photo. Or you got to take a whole bunch of them and make sure that one of them is good.
Yeah,
that can be a hard line to walk between taking the photos for the purposes of having memories and fulfilling your need to take photos, versus not even getting the camera out and just going out and playing and doing whatever the kids are doing. Well, and just letting that go and saying, you know what, having photos of this isn't really that important. It'd be cool if I had one or two, but whatever.
Yeah,
just go play water guns with the kids for a while. And
totally,
they're going to have a much better time because you're out there with them, and so are you. And if you forget about it in 5 years, so what?
Life goes on, right?
Yeah.
And if we look back on the photos that our parents took of us when we were kids, there's not 50,000 of them. There's a dozen from one vacation, and then maybe a couple in the summer. And certainly our dad took a lot of pictures, but we didn't have 600 photos of every little event. And somehow we still grew up and became productive members of society with families of our own. So it's nice to have those memories, but yeah, maybe not. You don't need tons and tons and tons of photos. So anyway, Phil, I think we explored the issue pretty well. What would you say?
Absolutely. I think so. I was just to say, it's like that pendulum thing. Right now, another reason that we didn't have 50,000 photos of us when we were kids is because it was expensive to take photos, to use film and develop and all that. But now that pendulum has swung to the other side, where taking 50,000 photos costs you nothing.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do with 50,000 photos? Nothing. So we've got to pull it back. We've got to find that middle ground again, and that is just training. That is training yourself, and I don't know. That takes a lot of work.
I'm going to go on a little bit a tangent here. So there's a lot of ways in which AI is being used to solve this problem for us, and Google recently talked about at their I/O keynote the new software that they have built into Google Photos that will go through all of your photos from an event like a birthday or vacation, and use artificial intelligence to find the best photos, and then it makes it basically picks out the best photos for you. And when I see that, I cringe a little bit, because to me, if I have to rely on a computer to pick out the best photos, then I'm doing something wrong. And I don't want a computer telling me what it thinks are the photos that I need to save and have as my most precious memories. And that's not to say that the features, like, some people use that and it's great and they love it and that's fine. I'm not criticizing anyone else. But for me, when I see the computer solving my problem of not controlling my own photos, then that tells me I need to do something differently and be more intentional and take fewer but better photos and stuff like that. So
yeah, that's my rant. You have that responsibility of taking the best photos, not picking them from a pile of photos, but just taking them up front.
Yeah,
yeah.
Anyway, that's probably neither here nor there. So Our goal today was to talk about our early days of getting involved in photography. And I think we certainly did that. We talked about some of the challenges, some of the solutions, and what we do today. So, hey, man, that was
Good
awesome.
stuff. Good stuff.
That was good stuff.
I'm glad we had this fun little chat.
We should do this more often.
Let's think about doing this again in a month or so and talk about something totally different. Like,
what's our
maybe
topic going to be?
Macro photography.
Macro. That sounds
Close-ups,
awesome.
flowers, that kind of thing.
That's a great idea. Macro photography. We should do that, Phil.
Let's do that.
Okay.
All right.
Well, listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on any of this. And if you have any thoughts or tips on macro photography for our next show or thoughts about this show, go to cameradads.com. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're everywhere. We basically have taken over the whole internet. So there's nowhere you can't find us.
If it's Camera Dads, it's us.
All right.
I think I just got a slogan for our show.
If it's Camera Dads, it's us. All right. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, thanks, son.
All right. See you later.